In today's video, we're taking a look at some NHL trade rumors as well as some free agent talk. We're looking at the futures of players like Torey Krug, Zdeno Chara, Frederik Andersen, Matt Murray, and Max Domi. We'll get into all the latest on those players coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a lot to cover today. We're taking a look at the future of some very big-time important players around the NHL. I want to kick things off with the Boston Bruins. Of course, as we know, the Bruins were recently eliminated from the playoffs in round 2 by the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Lightning certainly took over that series, and the Bruins look like they certainly have a ways to go before they can really compete to get back to the Stanley Cup Finals. Obviously, they have a lot of players that are important, like Chara and Krug, that need new deals. Some other guys getting closer to the end of their contracts, like Tuukka Rask, David Krejci. And there's certainly a lot of question marks around that team and what they're going to do to be able to bounce back for next year and beyond. Now, a couple of guys we're going to focus on though today are Chara and Krug. Now, of course, Zdeno Chara is getting up there in years, but he seems to be still in excellent shape and still able to contribute and play. Originally, when they were first beat out, he was asked about his future, and he didn't really want to get into it. Said he'd just get off the ice, wasn't really sure what his future really held. But he's now conducted another interview where he basically said that he has the desire to play. He feels like he can still contribute, and he's still in good physical condition, and that he only sees himself being a Boston Bruin. But of course, it's not entirely his choice whether or not he gets a contract with the Boston Bruins. Again, that's between management as well as his agent. But he certainly has expressed his interest and desire to remain with the franchise and continue playing and continue being their captain. So I guess that's a positive sign. Would not be shocked at all if Chara signs again another one-year contract with obviously a lot of bonus opportunities to help him earn more money. Obviously, they're going to have some cap issues like a lot of teams, and obviously he can't take up too much room given the situation. Last year, he was paid $2 million and had an opportunity to earn upwards of an extra 1.75 in bonuses. So wouldn't be surprised to see a similar kind of contract, maybe a little bit lower salary, difficult to say, but it's certainly going to be some other bigger question marks like Torey Krug. Now, in the answer for Torey Krug, you're asking what his thoughts were around as he played his last game as a Boston Bruin. He basically said he's really enjoyed his time in Boston. He really appreciated everything the organization has done for him, but he did acknowledge that his future is uncertain at this point. He was asked bluntly if he would accept a one-year contract, and he really shot that down, saying that's not something he was interested in. That over the so far in his career, he's had shorter-term deals, and he understands everything with the economics in the league due to the shutdown and COVID and everything going on. But that he really needs to look after himself in this scenario, and that taking a one-year contract to bet on himself isn't really what he's looking for right now. So that's going to pose issues for Boston. Doing a longer-term deal for significant amount of money is going to be very challenging for the Bruins to do, and I guess they need to decide if they want to have him in the future with the team, or do they want to move on? Do they see the defense being just as good with McAvoy and Carlo, maybe Matt Grzelcyk taking on a bigger role in the absence of Torey Krug? But he certainly drives a lot of the offense. He's a great puck mover back there and a great contributor to their success. And without Krug, the blue line is certainly going to look a little bit different. But if he's looking for that long-term, bigger money deal and is looking to really cash in and maximize for his long-term security, which you totally understand. I mean, every player has earned that right to become an unrestricted free agent and explore what's out there. And you can't blame them for doing that. And with all the uncertainty, if a player can get a long-term deal versus a short-term deal, they're going to opt for that security for their own well-being in their family. So clearly, I think Torey Krug more than likely is not going to be back in Boston. Not that they're not interested. I just don't see how they can make it work. So you have to wonder where he might end up. I know there's been a lot of talk about the Detroit Red Wings. Obviously, they're going through a rebuild. But at the same time, you have to wonder, even though they could use a guy like him, does it make sense for them to ink a long-term contract, a bigger money deal, based on the state that they're in, where they're not going to be contending for at least a few more years as they continue to get better and add more pieces through the draft and whatnot. So difficult to say where Krug goes. But at this point, both of them would like to remain in Boston, but I really don't think, based on the comments from Krug, that it's likely going to happen. And we'll have to see where he goes. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Where do you think is the most likely landing spot for Torey Krug, assuming he does leave Boston, which at this point looks pretty likely? And do you think Chara can stay in Boston, sign another one-year contract? Because it certainly sounds like that's where his heart is at, and that's what he'd like to do. Now I want to touch on the whole goaltending scenario between the Penguins and the Leafs and Frederik Andersen, Matt Murray. Obviously, there's been a lot of of talk here. Of course, we had a lot of talk before linking Matt Murray to the Maple Leafs. We saw the Kapanen trade, and many wondered, does this mean that the Leafs won't be going after Murray because they've already completed a deal? And the answer really is not necessarily, but we heard comments from NHL insider Elliot Friedman indicate that he thought that the asking price might be a little bit much for Toronto, and that they also might be concerned the fact that he's a restricted free agent with arbitration rights, and the arbitration award could end up being around $6 million. And obviously, as much as they might want to bring him in, if possible, that's even more money than what Freddie Andersen's making, and that they might not really be able to or want to do that, and that's their concern. Obviously, longer term, without knowing when the cap's going to increase, because we're likely looking at least 2 to 3, maybe even 4 years, but I think 3 is probably a safe bet. For them to have a goaltender making even more money than what they're paying to Andersen now is going to make things even more difficult and even more challenging to keep this roster intact. And obviously, Dubas sounds like he wants to keep the big four in place for another opportunity, at least one more season before he considers trading a guy like Nylander. It makes things complicated for sure. But then we've heard lately from Darren Dreger, which sounds a little bit different. He said that the Leafs have had a long-standing interest in Matt Murray, obviously, which is not a huge shock, dating back to the connection, as I mentioned before, in the Sault Ste. Marie Greyhounds and the OHL. Of course, that's where Kyle Dubas and Sheldon Keefe first met, and they both worked with that organization, so they both know Matt Murray very well from those days in junior. Obviously, he's had a lot of success in the NHL, and Kyle Dubas seems to be quite into bringing in players that he knows and he's trusted, he's worked with before, and knows that they have that ability to win. That's all about building that culture and what he feels is the right mix of players to take the Leafs up the next level towards a Stanley Cup. So clearly, there's no surprise there that there would be interest. And many people, I've seen numerous people now around the NHL mention that they feel that Freddie Andersen is done. And that the other big reason why we haven't seen a trade yet between the Leafs and the Penguins is a couple of reasons. One, there's a ton of interest in Murray, apparently. Frank Saravalli of TSN is listing a number of teams that have expressed interest in the goaltender, including many Canadian teams like Edmonton, Calgary, and Ottawa. You get Minnesota in the mix. Colorado's another one to watch as well. Buffalo Sabres are another team in there who certainly have some question marks around their goaltending. So, there's a ton of interest around Murray, which could entice a bit of a bidding war. And there has been reports that Rutherford at least has one official offer on the table. But of course, he's not anxious to pull the trigger here because he knows the longer he waits, teams get beat out of the playoffs. And the further we get into this, the offseason, that there's going to be more teams present offers, and he can kind of create a little bit of a bidding war and get the most out of the asset before making the trade. But in the case of Toronto, they need to be able to find a home for Freddie Andersen. If he makes a Matt Murray acquisition first, then it's obviously apparent that Andersen's going to be going, and that's going to kind of create a situation where Dubas may not be able to get as much value coming back for his goaltender, and Andersen he'd be looking to move. So it could diminish the value because teams are not going to be overly kind to help out. Now, another key thing on Andersen, and which makes it attractive to a lot of teams, is that even though he has a $5 million cap hit, his structure for his income this year is $4 million in bonus, which has already been paid, and only $1 million in salary. So the acquiring team will only have to pay him $1 million for 1 year of Freddie Andersen. Of course, they can consider negotiating an extension anytime after they acquire him, if that indeed does take place. But Dreger seems to be pretty confident here that the Leafs are very interested. He's not going to say for sure that they're the only team or that they're definitely going to make the acquisition, but it seems as though that they are heavily shopping Freddie Andersen, and they want to get a deal in place for that first, which only makes sense before they go hard after Murray and really make that acquisition. Now, what the asking price could be, it's difficult to say. I mean, we just saw Jake Allen be traded from St. Louis to Montreal. I know he's not quite the same level. He's a little bit older, been more of a backup as of recent, but he's got great stats, especially in the playoffs. And they basically only gave up a third-round pick. It was a bit of a salary dump, obviously, in St. Louis's part, trying to free up money. But that's going to obviously impact the price tag, I think, on the goaltending market here going forward. Obviously, like I said, there's expected to be a lot of goaltenders change, uniforms here through the offseason as well. But as much as the Leafs look to be very interested in Murray, I think they're kind of looking at other goalies as well. And it wouldn't be a complete shocker if nothing works out and they do have to hang on to Andersen for the coming season. But like I said, the reports around the NHL indicate many feel he's done. And it's just a matter of time here before they find a trade and make the acquisition for Murray or go into free agency. But I think we're going to probably be waiting on this a little bit just because obviously there's still a few teams in the playoffs and we're not really hardcore into the offseason here as of yet. But a team that's in the postseason still that apparently is in the mix is the Avalanche. And one of their beat reporters, Adrian Dater of Colorado Hockey Now, has indicated on Twitter that he keeps hearing that between all the chatter around Grubauer and Pat Favel-François and Hutchison that they have has been playing amazingly here as of late, which we never would have guessed when he was with the Leafs earlier. But the starting goalie next year for the Avs very well could be Matt Murray. Like I reported before that Sakic apparently had conversations about making an acquisition previously, and it never worked out. So it would not be shocking if they revisit that here yet again. But like I said, the other thing that's going to impact all this is there's so many goalies out there. If you take a look at the teams I mentioned that were interested in the services of Matt Murray, like Edmonton, Calgary, Ottawa, Buffalo, Minnesota, there's a lot to pick from in free agency as well. So as much as Murray's got cups to his name, he also has been inconsistent the last few years, might be making $6 million. So, they have other options that very well might work out better. So do you see a case here where the Penguins really end up trading Murray to the Leafs, and obviously the Leafs end up moving Andersen to another team? I mean, it seems to be all the talk right now, and it seems like it's getting more and more likely that there's a ton of interest and they want to make it happen. It's just a matter of kind of connecting the dots here and lining everything up. But let me know what your thoughts are down below, especially if you're a Leafs fan. I'd love to know what you think of this concept of Andersen being shown the door. Hard to say what the return would be, and then Murray being the guy in Toronto, at least on the next short-term here basis on the next couple of years. Now, a quick update as well on the situation with the Arizona Coyotes. I know we've talked about recently possibly having a bit of a fire sale and a rebuild, and then we had news yesterday that they were still pushing to re-sign Taylor Hall, which certainly conflict each other. It seems like some of the NHL insiders have very different sources, different information, kind of taking us in different directions. So we're just going to have to be patient here and wait and see what happens, because clearly these teams are, in a bit of a transitioning phase. And in the case of Arizona, I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of anything until we have a clear picture on who the permanent full-time general manager is. I mean, obviously right now, Steve Sullivan's the interim GM, and I'm sure that he's acting and going about his business as if, he is the full-time permanent guy, that it's going to be his job, because right now it's probably his to lose. I'm sure he's involved with management trying to kind of convince them that he should be given an opportunity. And at the same time, though, until that decision's made, you just can't suspect that we're going to have, a full set of trades that we could see here. I mean, obviously, we talked about Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Darcy Kuemper being on the move, maybe even, deeper into the roster with some of their other defensemen. They got a bunch of D on expiring contracts that could be helpful to other organizations, especially, ones that are going for a cup. You can never have too many defensemen, too much depth, though there certainly would make sense that there would be some interest in that regard. So obviously that would be a good scenario, but I really just don't see a situation where we see interim GMs, Steve Sullivan, really pulling the trigger and doing a whole lot here until he's either given that full-time job or the Coyotes go in a different direction. But we'll see if the reports here on the rebuild are accurate or how they proceed. But it just doesn't seem to make sense right now that if they're going to rebuild, why Taylor Hall would stay and why they'd want to dish out a ton of money to him if that's indeed the direction that they're heading. Now, lastly, here I want to touch on the future of Habs forward Max Domi. Now, there is a new article in the Hockey News outlining some potential destinations for Domi, assuming he does indeed get traded. There's been another player who had a lot of talk around him since the Habs season came to an end. We saw the fact that he was basically used in a fourth-line role, didn't put up a lot of points, didn't really have a great return to play postseason, if you want to call it that, and it just kind of fueled a lot of speculation since then. Now, we did see afterwards as well that his reference to the Canadiens was removed from his social media accounts. I did see his Twitter account earlier today does have Montreal on there, so I'm not sure what was removed previously, but it's there now, at least on Twitter. I haven't checked anything else. Not really much of an Instagram user myself, so I don't know what he's showing on his current profile on that platform. But either way, the Hockey News lists several teams that would make sense for them that would be wanting to acquire somebody who could be a number 2 center. Obviously, the Minnesota Wild are a prime target. You get the Buffalo Sabres, make a lot of sense. You get the Columbus Blue Jackets, and you also have the Winnipeg Jets. Now, obviously, all of those teams need top 6 center help. Domi had a good season last year in that role, and this year seemed to be, as the season went on, his role diminished, and obviously his point total suffered as a result of that. He didn't really play consistently with a lot of the players he played with last year, where he had more success. I mean, could we see him go to Winnipeg? Obviously, his dad is linked to that organization from years back, so obviously, that would be a good fit. The Jets been looking for a number 2 center for a long time. Not really sure what the package would be or what they'd be looking for, but he kind of fits what they're looking for. Same as anything with the other teams I mentioned. Columbus, Buffalo, Minnesota all need help at that position. So clearly, they would all be good potential destinations here, but we also saw recently that he fired his agent, hired Darren Ferris, who of course is the agent for Taylor Hall. He's the agent for Mitch Marner, kind of known for driving a hard bargain. Obviously, his previous agent, Pat Brisson, is known to be a really good longtime friend of Habs GM Marc Bergevin, so maybe he saw that as a bit of a conflict. I don't know. We're not really sure the reasons for it. Of course, we haven't really had any public statements in regards to that, just that there was a change. So we'll see what happens. But this article from the Hockey News does drive a lot of sense here on where Domi could land. That would make sense. I know we had a lot of previous connections at Pittsburgh, but I'm not really sure at this point that that's really going to happen with all the other moves they've made. I guess you can't rule out anything with Jim Rutherford. Really, he's been a bit of a wild card when it comes to making some of these trades. So let me know which of the teams the Hockey News is referencing as a landing spot for Max Domi makes the most sense to you, and give me your mock trades down below in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. I hope you're enjoying these outdoor videos here from beautiful downtown Fredericton, New Brunswick. I had lots of great feedback on these outdoor videos, and I plan on continuing them as long as we possibly can here, as long as, of course, the weather cooperates. So let me know your thoughts on that down below as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.